Dr. Bremmer, so can you share some perspective on whether or not there's a solution possible with the China trade war?
There's certainly possible solutions. I don't think there's a solution coming anytime soon. If what you mean is, are we heading towards a deal, I think the Chinese government has decided they're going to, at the very least, wait out President Trump until we see what happens with upcoming elections. In part, the sides are just too far, particularly on the technology side, where the Chinese feel like Huawei is in a real war with the Americans. And unless the daughter of the founder, the CFO, is released, which requires an independent judicial process to go through, it's not a political decision, and unless the Americans stop hitting Huawei, not just domestically, but also using other countries around the world, the Chinese have basically decided that they can ride through the economic hits of the existing tariffs. I think that's probably right, and so as a consequence, no, I don't think we're heading for a solution. I think the window of opportunity is actually closed on that.
What's your perspective on the Iran-Saudi Arabia situation? Are we heading for, do you think, conflict, or again, let me do that one again. What's your perspective on the Iran-Saudi Arabia situation?
Well, Boris Johnson, the British Prime Minister, just today talked about wanting to take the lead in negotiating a new deal, a new Iran deal, and Trump immediately said, oh, that's a great idea. Macron, the French president at the G7, just a few weeks ago talked about $15 billion in new credit for the Iranians in exchange for future oil delivery. Trump was interested in that. In between those two things, we had the Iranians involved in perhaps directly engaged in strikes against Saudi oil processing facilities, 50% of their energy offline immediately. And yet you did not see an American military response. You saw very little in terms of additional sanctions, not hitting the Chinese, for example. All of that tells you very clearly Trump's focus is still very much on diplomacy. So the Saudis are absolutely on the back foot here as a consequence. They're feeling vulnerable. The Emiratis surely are as well. America sending some additional defensive forces in the region is going to help reduce that level of concern, but doesn't fundamentally change the narrative. Trump is looking for talks. And by the way, no one should be shocked if we end up getting a surprise meeting between Trump and President Rouhani this week at the United Nations General Assembly. Stranger things have happened, and certainly that was the turnaround on North Korea that we saw before.
Given these events, what's their global economic impact likely to be?
Well, I mean, the global economy is doing pretty well, but obviously more people are talking about recession right now. Just last week, you had a majority of American CFOs saying they expect recession before elections in 2020. First time since 2008 that's been the case. Market economists, about 30-35% likelihood of recession. They believe in the next year. That's gone way up over the course of the past couple of months. We see that China's going to struggle, probably won't hit 6% growth. India's around 5%. Germany's about to be in technical recession after the third quarter. All the things you just asked me about and others, trade tensions between Japan and South Korea, trade tensions between the Europeans and the Americans, Brazil and the Europeans, those things are all geopolitically, and they're driving more concerns about the market. So what's interesting about this likely recession is that it's going to be more driven by geopolitical volatility and conflict than by an economic bubble bursting. When that happens, the geopolitical resilience is much lower, much likely to be worse as a consequence of that.
Dr. Bremmer, thanks very much indeed.
My pleasure, sure.